Welcome back to the Untold Stories, exclusive before Start the Story Now. Subscribe to the channel and comment down where you're from and what time it is for you right now. Now, turn off the lights, settle in, and let the darkness speak. In the autumn of 1896, along a wagon road bent like a crooked finger toward the settlement of Ash Pines, a bridal veil hung snagged on a thorn bush white at sunrise, grayer by noon, black as the soot from a mill chimney by dusk. 3 riders swore they heard a woman sobbing where the road dips into a culvert. A sound wet and breathless, like rain crawling through reeds. The church bell did not ring. The pastor was ill. And yet, in the blue hour between day and dark, something somewhere told 3 thin notes that the mountains carried and then swallowed. A mule balked. A baby would not stop crying. The mill whistle blared at an hour it had no right to. The veil shivered once in a wind that never reached the trees. This is a story about a promise and the pines that kept it, about a bride whose name was whispered to the bark and returned by the moss. It is a story pulled from a ledger with its corners singed, from a letter the pastor burned and then pretended to forget, from footprints that turned in circles as if the feet wore them, were no longer sure they belonged to a body. It is a quiet story, a slow story, but the older women will not speak it in full darkness. They cover their mirrors first. Ash Pines lay where 2 ridgelines kissed like conspirators. A stout river ran sullen and tea-colored past the far edge, and the ground there tasted of iron. Men said you could smell the nails, still sleeping in the ore if you pressed your cheek to the dirt. The town was no more than a crooked row of buildings: livery, cooper's shed, a store with a lean-to tacked on like an apology. The mill crouched down like a muscled animal ready to spring. Wood smoke drifted tail-thin above roof lines. You could tell who was boiling lye, who was frying salt pork, and who had nothing to burn at all. Evenings carried the mill's rasp and the mutter of mule bells, and from the hollows came an old sound that might have been wind, or might have been a hymn sunk to its knees. They worked by habit there. Habit steadied the hands. Habit told you which creek stones would slice your boots and which would hold. Habit named the days: the wash day, the sharpening day, the day a man took his cap in both hands and asked another man to stand witness. Names were stitched into the town the way initials are stitched into a wedding quilt. Hurst, Boone, Keene, Merritt, some in firm thread, some already fraying. Nathaniel Hurst tended the big wheel at the mill. A hard, square man with a limp he never explained. He counted under his breath when the blades bit the logs, as if steady numbers could hold back the splinters. He wore his grief with the same care he wore his Sunday coat, kept it brushed, kept it neat, never took it off but never let it show stain. Children hid when he came down the lane because his eyes always looked as if they had just seen smoke where a house should be. Wesley Boone, thin as a sapling and twice as bendable, hauled timber and talked when other men were quiet. He had a superstition for every creek bend, a prayer for every mule shoe, and a different story for why his left ear was gone at the tip. He laughed too quickly and fell silent too quickly. Men liked him when work was easy and avoided him when the weather turned. Pastor Greeley was a narrow man, a reed with a collar. He carried a Bible with a thumb dipped in lampblack, a mark from where he had once tried to catch a falling wick. He believed the Lord was most present in the silence between words, which is where the pines did their best talking. The one the town watched most that autumn was Eliza Merritt. Pale hands, milk glass skin, blue thread in her hem where no one would see, for luck. She spoke slow, as if choosing her words from a shelf and weighing each for chipped edges. She had lived her life in rooms that smelled of starch and pennyroyal, keeping house for her aunt since girlhood. She wrote clean cursive with a schoolmarm's patience and held the hymnal so gently you expected the pages to confess. Folks said she was promised to Jonas Keene, a tinsmith with fast hands and slow pockets. He came through twice a year with a mule cart clinking like a drawer of spoons. He had a smile that began before his mouth found it, and eyes that looked at you as if measuring the thickness of your shell. Some said he was kind. Some said he never forgot a coin owed him. Some said both were true, and that was the worst sort. When Jonas returned in the last days of October, a frost already prowled the gullies, whitening cobwebs and sharpening the edges of everything that could cut. He walked right to the store porch where men passed a jug and stories, and he tipped his hat, as if to say he knew every tale already and who had told it. "Eliza well?" he asked, though he had seen her and all of them had seen him see her. "Like a bell," said Wesley Boone. Too quick, and earned a scowl. The storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Talbot, set aside a bolt of muslin. "There'll be a wedding," she told the younger girls. And they pretended not to listen as hard as they could. A day later, a crate arrived with paper lily, thread spun thin as breath. A length of veil so fine that, when the light laid its hand on it, it vanished to a whisper. The pattern was small leaves and smaller tears, the kind of work that had always taken women's eyes and never thanked them for it. Eliza's aunt touched it and said nothing, only lifted her head as if hearing something at a distance, a wire singing, then set the cloth to air on the line, the wind, which had been asleep 3 days and 3 nights. Woke. There are places where a road remembers feet, places where each step piles up until the dirt learns a name and will not let go of it. The wagon road into Ash Pines had a place like that, a low bend where thorn bushes nested and the ditch held a little water even after a dry spell. Children lost shoes there. Women cursed it, and men pretended they did not. The day before the wedding, someone found the veil gripping a thorn as a drowning person grips a root. No one saw it dragged. No one saw it fall. It simply had become a part of the bush, as if the plant had grown white. Delicate leaves in the night. Sheriff Abel Dunn lifted the veil with 2 fingers and the careful face of a man opening a letter not addressed to him. He shook it once. It shed a gray dust no one could decide the name of. He carried it to his office and laid it on the desk. Then he shut the door and did not open it till morning. The next sunrise was the kind that makes you clear your throat for no reason. Cold light, thin as scraped bone. The veil had blackened in the night. The blackness began at the edges and crept in. The center stayed a stubborn, bruised white, like the last clean place in a ruined room. Sheriff Dunn, who had buried 3 sons by fever and did not believe in talking to cloth, spoke to the veil. "Where?" he asked. It made no answer that ears could hold. The town bent itself around the news. It bent the way a storm bends corn, all one direction, each stalk touching the other, so the whole field moves like a single mind. Women said Eliza must have gone to the river to look at herself in still water, the way brides do. Men said Jonas had business in the next valley and would meet her there, the way men always intend to. Children said the thornbush liked pretty things and would not give them back. By noon, Pastor Greeley had called for 3 bells. But the rope slipped his hand and no sound came. He blamed the knot. Others blamed the one who first knotted it, dead 10 years. Yet still the kind of man whose knots remembered how to fail. Eliza did not come to the dressmaker's. She did not come to the church. She did not come to the store to buy sugar. She could not afford for a cake that would be eaten too fast to justify the cost. Her room held the indent of her body like a warning. Her comb lay with 3 hairs snagged fast as if they too were reluctant to leave. Her aunt pressed her palm to the bed and felt coolness move under it. The way a snake leaves when you lay your hand on a rock and the warmth goes with it. "Maybe she ran," said Mrs. Talbot, but in the kind of voice that asked to be contradicted. "Ran where?" asked Nathaniel Hurst, who did not look up from his pocket-knife. It was a question with teeth. That evening, a light tapping sounded at the parsonage door. Pastor Greeley found no one outside, only a square of paper, damp at the corners from the breath of the night. He read it once. He read it twice. Then he held it to the candle and watched the edges curl in. The smoke moved toward him, not up. His wife, who had known him since he was a boy who cried only when animals suffered, saw his hands begin to shake. What was it? She asked. Foolishness, he said, though his mouth had dried. A girl's fear caught in ink. Later, much later, she said she could have repeated the words, though she had never seen them. She said they ran a groove in her mind and everything she thought slid along it. She said the letter had been written by Em, and that in it, Eliza had asked someone to tell Jonas. When he returned, there were narrow footprints on his floorboards. Bare. Clean. No crust of mud. No smear of clay. They stopped by the bed, turned in a circle, then faced the door again, as if a woman had stood and decided and undecided 3 times over. He measured them with a length of twine and told himself they were his own. He told himself there is no such thing as a footstep that does not come paired with a sound. He did not tell anyone else. Men in ash pines learned early to save their strangest truth for God or the river, which amounts to much the same dot in the gray just before dawn. Someone saw Nathaniel Hurst on the road below the mill, his hat off, hair showing white at the temples, a little more than it had the day before. He had the look of a man listening to a faraway train through the rails. When the watcher coughed, Nathaniel started, then straightened himself like a boy before a whipping. He limped on. In his pocket, his fingers moved, counting. A wedding day should smell of soap and starch. This day smelled of pennies and rain that had not yet made up its mind. Women came with pins between their lips. Men came with excuses between their teeth. The church shivered. The door drifted open and closed as if the building were breathing too shallowly to keep its candled air. Pastor Greeley had settled his collar when Jonas Keene arrived. Late, mule lathered white, eyes thin and bright and private. Where is she? Jonas asked, skipping hello, skipping apology, landing on accusation. We were about to ask you, said Sheriff Dunn. He looked tired of being a man. Sometimes the job requires a person made of ash. Jonas set his jaw. Eliza is full of notions. She walks when she should sit. She listens when she should speak. He turned his hat in his hands. She promised, and I promised, and that should be that. What did you promise? Asked Pastor Greeley, who believed in saying the words out loud, so the devil had less room to hide between them. A different life, Jonas said. And the words were both bitter and sweet, like a syrup gone to rot. No more washing other people's dishes. No more bending to other people's prayers. And what did she promise you? Mrs. Talbot's voice came from the back like a knitting needle. Jonas's face bent a little at the edges. To be where she said she'd be. Sheriff Dunn told him about the veil. He kept his voice level, as if speaking to a mule with a skittish heart. Jonas closed his eyes at the mention of the thorn bush and did not open them again for a long time. Who touched it? He asked. I did, the sheriff said. Then it will not forget you, Jonas said. Not kindly. That afternoon, the storekeeper wrote a small note in his account book. Eliza M. did not collect her ribbons. Mrs. Talbot says the veil looks like coal smoke when the light hits it. He underlined the date October 30th and tried to calculate whether the ribbon money could be recouped if the wedding was delayed. This is not cruelty. This is the arithmetic that keeps a roof from sagging into itself. Children began to play a new game. They tied strips of gauze to the thorn bush and dared one another to snatch them free without bleeding. None succeeded. One girl came home with her palms webbed in red and did not cry until the house fell quiet. She said the bush had whispered to her in a voice made of many smaller voices. She said it had asked a question that did not have a word for its answer. At sundown, a choir of frogs started up in a bog that had not held frogs in 10 years. The men looked at one another the way men do when they are deciding whether to drink or to pray. The women lit lamps. the lamps for a mile up and down the valley, burned with a faint blue tucked inside the yellow, the kind of blue that means a draft, or a spirit, or simply an old chimney asking to be cleaned. This is the way the town breathed in those hours, shallow, then deep, hopeful, then ashamed, noisy, then not. A dog howled and was answered by another dog that did not exist. A baker's wife set bread on a sill and found it flattened by morning, as if a hand had rested there a long while and could not remember how to lift itself again. The river, which had made the same low sound for centuries, took on a harmony no one could hum after. More than one man woke to the feeling someone had sat at the edge of his bed to watch him sleep. And when he looked, there was only the small mercy of emptiness. Toward midnight, a shadow moved along the tree line, white where the branches were black, and black where the moon fell clean on the needles. It did not hurry. It did not sag. It kept to the edge, the way wild things do when they are still deciding if they wish to be seen. 3 riders, each alone on a different path, and each thinking himself the only witness, heard the sobbing begin and begin again as if conducted. One said he saw a hand lift, palm up, asking. Another said the hand belonged to a person with no face. The third said nothing at all and left his horse with its saddle still on to walk the long road home in boots that blistered him to the bone. By morning, frost took the shape of a kneeling woman in the ditch beside the thornbush, clear as cut glass, cruel as a saint's lesson. The sun came and could not bring itself to melt her fully. All day she remained, shining at the corners. And the children did not play in the lane. At the mill, Nathaniel Hurst bled the stone and checked the belts and counted the teeth on the blade under his breath, the way a soldier counts the seconds between artillery shells. He paused once, when a slip of white flashed at the far end of the saw-room, a trick of light or a scrap of cloth, no thicker than breath. The smell of wilted flowers stayed in the air until closing bell. He turned the key in the mill lock with a care that might have been love or might have been fear. The difference is not always plain. In towns like Ash Pines, the pines are not trees but witnesses. They lean toward whoever speaks. They shut their needles in a hush when secrets pass under them. If you leave a promise among them, they will keep it as faithfully as any book with a clasp. They do not forgive. They do not forget. They stand and they remember, and the remembering sounds like wind even when the wind is elsewhere. That night, as lamps guttered and men settled to the sleep that comes to those who have spent their strength, a low, thin bell rang 3 times from nowhere anyone could point to. The dogs did not bark. The babies did not cry. The sound went into the houses like a draft and left each flame on each mantel shivering. No one will say whose window the next knock came to. No one will own the fact that a door opened to no one and a voice spoke a name with tenderness so terrible the hearer bit his knuckles to stifle the sob that rose to meet it. No one will admit to the taste of river clay on the back of the tongue that did not leave for a week, no matter how much whiskey it was washed with. But in the morning, on the step of the parsonage, a second letter lay, damp at the corners, trembling at the strokes. It was not there long, because Pastor Greeley learned, finally, that paper burns cleaner before it has been read aloud. He held it to the flame. The flame leaned toward it like a mouth. The ash rose and drifted in small, dedicated spirals when it settled on the mantel. It made the shape of a leaf, and then a teardrop, and then a veil laid out flat and waiting. The town went about its business as if business were a raft and the river had turned mean. Men kept their eyes on nails and belts and wheels. Women scrubbed and scolded and stacked and prayed. Children were told to play inside of the door and not to sing any songs they did not know the name of. The mule at the livery shed stood still for so long the stable boy thought it had learned to sleep standing without dreaming. And in the ditch by the thorn bush, the frost took her shape again, smaller, as if she were kneeling deeper, or as if the ground were swallowing what was left. Some say the veil turned black, because a hand that had no right to it touched it. Some say it turned black because a hand that had every right to it let it go. The pines say nothing, but they carry a scent after rain that is not rain. A sweetness with rot under it, a bride cake left too long on the table of a house no one lives in anymore. This is how the first day ended, with work done poorly and lamps burning late, with a thorn bush wearing a veil and a road losing a name, and a town remembering how to hold its breath. And the last sound in the night was not a bell, though 3 hard notes had rung and vanished. It was a single old word breathed by a mouth that was not quite a mouth. Wait. Dawn in Ash Pines was a quiet visitor. It arrived gently, spilling through the blue fog that clung to the ravines. But on the morning after the vanished wedding day, the light felt different, thin, unsure, as though the sun had to think twice about rising over this place at all. By the time the roosters found their voices, half the town already knew something was wrong. Rumors simmered through the cold, morning like sparks rolling off a dying log. Eliza never came home. The veil wasn't right. It breathed like a thing alive. I heard a woman laugh by the river last night, and there ain't no woman who laughs like that in Ash Pines. The veil in the sheriff's office lay on the desk like a dead bird, its lace stiff and brittle. Sheriff Abel Dunn stared at it as though it might shake itself awake. He hadn't slept. His eyes were rimmed red. His fingers tremored each time he reached for the coffee cup. Something had happened on that wedding eve. Something the sheriff feared naming. He leaned forward, examining the blackened edges of the veil. The discoloration spread in patterns as thin as veins, branching out like frost on a window pane. He tapped the cloth once with a pencil. It pulsed. Just once, like a muscle remembering how to contract. The sheriff dropped the pencil and stepped back, breath held tight. For a moment, he considered locking the veil away. But something told him a lock wasn't strong enough, not for cloth that reacted like living skin. He covered it with a towel instead, as if darkness would calm it. It didn't. The towel began to stain slowly, deliberately, like ink creeping through cotton. Sheriff Dunn shut the office door and left it closed. Across town, Wesley Boone was too frightened to speak. He kept glancing toward his cabin door, wiping sweat from his brow, though the morning was cold enough to frost the pump handle. He had tried to scrub the footprints from his floor, those narrow, delicate prints that had walked where no one stood. But they would not lift. No matter how he scraped or sanded or cursed under his breath, the marks stayed pressed into the wood like bruises. He had not slept. He had not eaten. And Wesley Boone, a man who talked even when no one was listening, found that he had no words. His neighbor, a wiry man with an ill-fitting hat, knocked on the window. "Wes, you alive in there?" Boone cleared his throat. "Alive enough," he whispered back. The neighbor frowned. Normally Wesley would have answered with a joke or a yarn about the time he claimed a fox had stolen his boot. But today he spoke like a man afraid his own voice might call something back. "You heard the cry last night?" the neighbor asked, looking over his shoulder at the tree line. "No," Wesley lied, but he had heard it. Everyone had. A cry that lifted and dropped like a woman calling for her lost child. Except there was no child. And no woman, not one that breathed. Anyway, then came the second disturbance. At Hearst Mill. Nathaniel Hearst arrived before the other workers, limping slightly more than usual. He held his key ring in a tight fist, glancing left and right as though expecting someone to leap from behind the stacked lumber. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and froze. Something was wrong with the air. It was thick, damp, cold enough to pierce through his coat. He lit a lantern and saw her, for half a breath. A figure in white stood at the far end of the sawroom, still as stone, face hidden beneath a long veil. Nathaniel's heart stopped. He blinked. The figure vanished. But in its place, The air held the scent of wilted flowers, funeral lily crushed beneath a boot. Nathaniel backed toward the door so fast he nearly fell. The lantern rattled in his hand. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He whispered a prayer he had not spoken since the war, when the other workers arrived. Wesley Boone among them. Nathaniel refused to open the mill until daylight filled every crack and corner, and even then, he kept glancing toward the far end of the sawroom. By midday, Pastor Greeley knew he could no longer hide what he had seen or what he had burned. His wife found him kneeling on the parsonage floor, staring at a patch of ash that refused to blow away. "I heard her voice," he whispered. "Whose voice?" his wife asked, but she knew. "Child," he said. "The Merritt girl, or what's left of her." He swallowed and told his wife the part he had not dared say aloud before. The letter. It was written after she vanished. His wife's hand flew to her mouth. He unfolded a trembling scrap from his pocket, the only piece of the second letter that had survived the flame. A corner of torn paper, smudged at the edges. 3 words only: "He sees me." The pastor's wife backed away, knees trembling. "Who sees her?" she whispered. Greeley looked toward the window, toward the dark line of pines beyond the church. The one she ran from. Or the one she ran to. He did not say Jonas's name. He did not have to dot as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The town changed. Shadows lengthened early. Dogs refused to go outside. Chickens pecked nervously at empty corners of the yard. Doors were shut before the sky even blushed. Orange. And then came the sound. A soft tapping. Tap. Tap. Not on doors. On windows. Every window. As though something moved through town, brushing its fingers along the glass, searching for one particular pane. One particular face. Mrs. Talbot screamed when she looked out and saw a shape in white gliding past her porch. Not walking, gliding. The hem of its dress never touching the ground. Her husband ran outside with a shotgun. There was no one there, only a strip of fabric snagged on the porch rail. Lace. Veil lace. He reached for it with shaking hands. It dissolved the instant he touched it, turning to black dust that blew against his skin like soot from a chimney fire. That same night, the children of Ashpines dreamed the same dream, every one of them. A woman stood at the edge of the river, crying into her hands, her dress soaked to the waist, her hair dripping, her voice ragged. But when she lifted her face, it was not wet with river water. It was smeared with clay. River clay, thick and gray-blue, packed into her mouth as though she had been forced to swallow it. The children woke, screaming. Some wet the bed. Some refused to sleep again. One child, the baker's boy, stared blankly at the ceiling for nearly an hour before muttering, "She's cold. She's so cold." He could not be comforted. The next morning, Jonas Keene returned. He strode into town with his mule lathered and wild-eyed, as though he'd ridden hard and fast through places no man should travel alone. He threw open the sheriff's door. "Where is she?" he demanded. The sheriff didn't answer at first. He gestured at the blackened veil on his desk. Jonas stepped closer, his face twisted. Rage, grief, guilt. "Something deeper. That is not hers," he said. But the sheriff knew he was lying. Jonas reached out a trembling hand. The sheriff slapped it away. "Don't touch it." Jonas seethed. "It's mine." Sheriff Dunn's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" Jonas swallowed, throat bobbing. "She gave it to me." "When?" He hesitated, a breath too long, and the sheriff caught it. "You saw her after she vanished," the sheriff said. Jonas flinched. "Tell me where," the sheriff pressed. But Jonas only shook his head. "I can't." "Why not?" Jonas's voice broke. "Because she wasn't whole." Later that evening, the sheriff tried to question him again, but Jonas Keene had Vanished. His mule remained tied outside the livery. His hat left on the porch of the boarding house. His boots sitting neatly beside the bed. But Jonas himself was gone. The only sign he had ever been. There's a single note. Do not follow the voice in the trees. Pastor Greeley, frantic and sleep-deprived, gathered a group of men from the mill. Nathaniel Hurst, Wesley Boone, Mr. Talbot, and 2 others joined him. The pastor held his lantern like a defender holds a shield. "We searched the hollow," he said. "No man goes there after dark," Hurst growled. "We go now," the pastor insisted, voice trembling but firm. "Because something went there last night." They made their way toward the mill, boots crunching over frost, lanterns swaying like dim stars. The trees seemed tighter than usual, closer. Leaning, listening. When they reached the hollow behind the mill, all 6 men stopped at once, because the ground had been disturbed. A long patch of earth, freshly turned, soft, sunken, as though something had been buried, or unburied. Nathaniel Hurst knelt beside it. "There's something under there," he whispered. They dug with their hands at first, scooping cold soil until their knuckles cracked. Then Mr. Talbot's fingers struck burlap. They froze. No one wanted to lift it. No one wanted to see what lay beneath. Pastor Greeley swallowed hard, reached down, and pulled. The burlap fell open. Inside lay not a body, but a shredded wedding gown, torn violently, threads stiff with dried clay and river grit. Bodice ripped clean through, the hem soaked in a darkness. That was not water. Wesley Boone gagged. Nathaniel Hurst fell backward. Pastor Greeley crossed himself over and over, and beneath the torn gown, the men saw something carved into the dirt. Footprints. Small. Bare. Delicate. And pointing in every direction, north, south, east, west, as if the person wearing them had spun in place. Confused, terrified, unable to find her way home, the pastor whispered. She tried to run. She couldn't. He touched the dirt with his fingertips. It was still warm. Behind them, in the darkness between the pines, a woman sobbed, a slow, broken sob. Wesley Boone screamed. The lanterns went out, all at once. As though a hand had pinched the flames. The men did not run at first. They were too shocked. But when the sobbing moved closer, when it shifted to a choking sound, when it breathed, they fled, stumbling out of the hollow, tripping over roots, gasping for air. They fled toward the safety of town. Pastor Greeley dropped the lantern. Nathaniel dropped his hat. Wesley fell twice and crawled, and none of them looked back, not once, because each man felt the same truth pressing on his spine. Something followed them, not fast, not slow. Just steady, matching their pace, like a bride walking down an aisle that led only to the grave. They reached town, breathless, shaking, wild-eyed. But when the sheriff asked what they'd seen, none could speak it aloud. Pastor Greeley simply whispered, "She's not at rest." And Nathaniel Hurst, still trembling, uttered the line the town would repeat for decades. "She's walking. God help us. She's walking." The night the men fled the hollow, Ashpine stopped pretending it was safe. By morning, the town wore a quiet dread. A dread you could smell in the air, like metal struck by lightning, or cloth singed by a candle's breath. The mill didn't open. The store stayed, shuttered. Even the river seemed to slow. People walked with their shoulders tight, as if expecting fingers to brush them from behind. Children were ordered to stay indoors. A sensible command, yet 3 mothers swore they saw their little ones talking to the empty yard at dawn, heads tilted as if listening to someone kneeling beside them. Who were you speaking to? One mother demanded of her boy. The child didn't blink. The bride, he whispered. But when pressed further, when asked what the bride had wanted, the child began to cry so violently he nearly choked. He could offer only one answer. She said she lost her face. The footsteps in the snow by mid-morning. A thin sheet of new snow covered ash pines, fresh, untouched, except for one thing. Footprints. Small, bare footprints, beginning at the river bank. Crossing the road, turning abruptly toward the church, and stopping at the pastor's door. Pastor Greeley and his wife stared at the prints for a long, terrible minute. The pastor knelt down, hovering his hand above the nearest one. No heat, no cold. Just nothing. As if whatever made them existed halfway between the two. His wife whispered, "Should we follow them?" "No," the pastor said immediately, his voice cracking. "Not unless you want to be led somewhere you won't return from." He followed the trail with his eyes instead. The prints were an invitation, or a warning, or both. The singing in the pines around noon. A sound drifted from the tree line. A melody, soft, strange, like a hymn sung by someone who only remembered half the tune. Women froze. Mid-sweeping. Men spilled their coffee. Every child stopped whatever they were doing at the exact same instant. Pines were singing. At first, it was faint, just a hum. But as the hour deepened, the song grew clearer. A woman's voice. Lonely. Unsteady. Weeping between the notes. Wesley Boone clapped his hands over his ears and shouted, "Don't listen. Don't listen to her. She ain't right, she ain't whole." But most people did listen, some out of fear, some out of pity, some because the sound felt like it had a hook buried in it. Nathaniel Hurst stood in the sawmill doorway, tears streaking down his face for reasons he could not understand. Mrs. Talbot dropped an entire crate of china onto the floor of the store. Pastor Greeley felt his knees give way as the voice tugged at something buried deep in him, something he wished he'd confessed years earlier. The singing continued for nearly 20 minutes, and when it stopped, the silence that followed felt bruised. The eyes in the brook that evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Two boys' brothers wandered, against their mother's warnings, toward a shallow brook south of town. They were looking for frogs. They found something else. The younger boy pointed. "There's someone in the water." Not in the water, under it. A white blur drifted beneath the surface. Not floating like a drowned body. Not sinking like a stone. Just moving. Sideways. As if pacing. The water was only 2 feet deep, but they saw the outline of a woman, veil trailing behind her like long hair drifting in the Waiwa current. "She's looking up at us," the older boy whispered. The younger squinted. "No, she ain't looking at us," he whispered back. "She ain't got eyes." Both boys screamed and ran. Neighbors later found the brook dry at its center, like something had drunk a straight, wide line of water from it. The pebbles at the bottom were arranged in a strange pattern. A circle with a single footprint pressed into the middle. Still wet, still forming. As if the foot had only just lifted. Jonas Keene's return, Part 2. Late that same evening, Jonas Keene stumbled into town again, though no one saw him arrive. He simply appeared on the steps of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dunn found him hunched over, shivering violently. His clothes were soaked as though he'd walked straight out of the river. "You need help," the sheriff said. Jonas lifted his head. His eyes were hollow, his lips blue. He opened his mouth to boo. Speak, instead of words. River clay dripped out onto the sheriff's floorboards. Thick. Cold. The sheriff recoiled. "Jonas, what happened to you?" Jonas's voice cracked like ice breaking free of a branch. "She followed me." No more questions were needed. The sheriff guided him inside. poured whiskey into a tin cup, and forced him to sip. Jonas clutched the cup with trembling fingers. She asked me why, he rasped. Why what? Why I left her. The sheriff's stomach twisted. And what did you tell her? Jonas swallowed hard. I told her the truth. Sheriff Dunn leaned in. Which is? Jonas closed his eyes. I told her. I didn't mean to. The sheriff waited, and? He pressed. Jonas whispered. She didn't believe me. The voice at the mill at midnight. Nathaniel Hurst woke to the sound of the mill whistle blowing a long, thin note. But the mill had no night shift. The wheel wasn't turning. The building was dark. Still he heard someone inside. A woman's voice calling his name. Nathaniel. Drawn like a moth, he left his bed and limped through town toward the mill. Frost coated the road. The moon hung low, swollen, and red. When he reached the mill door, the latch was already open. Inside, the smell of wilted flowers hit him so hard he nearly choked. His lantern lit only a few feet ahead. But he saw her, a woman, standing at the far end of the sawroom, exactly where he'd seen the figure earlier that week. This time, she was closer. Her veil brushed the floor. Her hands hung limp, her head tilted slightly, as though she heard a sound Nathaniel couldn't. Nathaniel. She whispered again. He swallowed. Eliza? He croaked. The figure stiffened, then jerked its head toward him with an unnatural snap. Nathaniel's lantern sputtered. The figure took one slow step forward. Nathaniel backed into the doorway. I'm sorry, he whispered, though he had no idea for what. The figure froze, then raised one hand and pointed. Not at Nathaniel. Behind him. Nathaniel spun, but saw only the empty road. And when he turned back, the bride was gone. Only a strip of veil fabric lay where she had stood, half transparent, half rotted. Nathaniel reached out to touch it. It disintegrated into black dust. Pastor Greeley's confession by dawn. Pastor Greeley sent for Sheriff Dunn. The sheriff found him sitting at his dining table, hands clasped tightly around a small wooden box. The pastor spoke without looking up. I have sinned, he whispered. The sheriff sighed. Pastor, everyone sins. This is different. Greeley opened the box. Inside lay 3 items. A lock of hair, tied with blue thread, a small scrap of veil lace, not yet blackened, a folded paper bearing the initials. Sheriff Dunn stiffened. You kept that, he whispered. From her? The pastor nodded slowly. She came to me a week before the wedding. She was afraid. Afraid of Jonas? No, the pastor said. Afraid of what she had seen. The sheriff leaned forward. Seen what? The pastor's face went gray. It wasn't a man she feared, he whispered. It was the pines. Something in them. Something old. He hesitated before adding, she said she heard her name whispered from the hollow. The sheriff swallowed hard. And why did she give you those things? The pastor's eyes filled. She said, if anything happened to her, I must not let him bury her in the hollow. Sheriff Dunn stared at the box, heart pounding. You think Jonas buried her? The pastor shook his head in terror. No, he whispered. I think Jonas tried. But the hollow did not keep her. The hollow awakens that afternoon. A group of men found fresh footprints near the hollow, not human. Footprints, small, bare, turning in circles again. But alongside them were deeper impressions, heavy, dragging. The shape of something crawling, something trying to pull itself out of the earth. The sheriff knelt beside the tracks. There are 2 sets, he whispered. Wesley Boone swallowed. 2? The sheriff nodded. One made by a woman. He pointed at the smaller pattern. And one made by something following her. The men stepped back instinctively. Is that what we heard last night? One asked. The sheriff didn't answer. But the question hung over them, like a storm cloud. The bride on the ridge near sunset. 3 hunters returned from the woods pale as ghosts. They claimed they saw Woman standing on the ridge above town. Walking, not breathing. Just standing, her veil trailing behind her like a banner, her dress whipping in a wind that the hunters did not feel. One hunter swore she was staring at him. Another swore she had no face. The third said nothing. He didn't speak for the rest of the night, or the next day. Or the next week. When pressed, he finally whispered, she was smiling. The final sign before the revelation. Late that night, ash pines fell into a cold so brutal it silenced even the insects. Sheriff Dunn walked the road alone, lantern swaying at his side. He paused at the thorn bush where the veil had first been found. Something new hung from the branches. Not cloth, a length of hair. Long. Dark. Still damp. Tied with a strip of blue threaded ribbon. Sheriff touched it. The hair was warm. Behind him, the pines rustled not with wind, but with breath. A voice followed, a whisper right at his ear. Do not let him bury me. Sheriff Dunn froze. Cold swept down his spine. He slowly turned. No one stood behind him, but in the ditch, where frost had clung for days, a shape now formed more clearly than ever. A kneeling woman. Her hands cupped. As if holding something she wanted him to see or return. The sheriff stepped back, because the shape in her hands was a face. Broken. Clay covered. In hers. The sheriff ran, and the sobbing followed him. All the way back to town. The truth in ash pines did not arrive like thunder. It came on paper. It came in ledgers, in ink gone to rust, in corners creased by hands that shook. It came from mouths that had not told a difficult thing in years, and from a hollow where the soil had learned to remember. It began with a box. Pastor Greeley did not want to open it a second time. His fingers moved across the lid as if reading a braille meant for cowards. The sheriff stood waiting, hat in one hand, the other already closing into a fist without meaning to. Nathaniel Hearst occupied the doorway so the room could not change its mind about letting air in. Do it, Sheriff Dunn said. The pastor undid the tiny clasp. The lid lifted with a whispering sound, as if the wood had been praying. Inside, the lock of hair tied with blue thread. The scrap of veil that had not blackened yet, pale as a fingernail. The folded paper with EM on it, the loops neat, the point of the M cut sharp. A schoolmarm's discipline, even in fear. The pastor slid out the note. He had read it enough times to have grown a small scar in the brain where the words fit. He unfolded. He read. Aloud. October 23, 1896. Pastor, you will not believe me, so I am obliged to write it. There is a seam in the pines where voices come through. I heard mine among them, though I was standing there holding my own throat shut. It was my voice and it told me to kneel. I did not. I am ashamed to say I stepped backward and nearly fell. I saw a man by the hollow, but when I called, the man did not look to me. He looked to the ground, as if the ground were speaking his name. Tell Jonas we must not pass that way after sundown. Tell him to take the road by the mill pond instead. Tell him I will marry him where there is water running. The pines keep what falls among them. E.M. Silence. A long, careful silence. The sheriff took the paper, as if it might jump. He read it again, lips moving. Then she knew, Nathaniel Hearst said. His voice scraped the door jamb. She knew before the veil. She feared before the veil, the pastor corrected. Knowing's got bone. Fear's got only breath. Sheriff Dunn placed the note back in the box. There's more, he said. There always is. We look. They looked. They looked until the hour thinned. They found it in a place that had no right to hold anything but dust. The mill ledger. Hearst's book. Numbers marching in calm rows. Pine in. Boards out. Wages paid. Nails purchased. The arithmetic of survival. And then at the back, after the last tally script that was not Nathaniel's, light as a girl's, but exhausted. The ink had paled. Some letters had bled, as if the paper had been damp when it drank them. Sheriff. Done read. I have walked the same 20 steps 7 times and cannot make them new. The trees repeat them back to me. The hollow breathes. Something under it listens. Jonas says I hear things because I want to hear them. I do not want to hear a thing, not human. A second line, in a different mood, the hand unsteady. Perhaps written while standing up. He told me the pines would keep our secret. The pines do not keep anything that is not theirs already. And a third, the one that made the room lean slightly. There's a space between the roots at the far end of the wheel. It takes a shape after midnight. It is as if the ground has been taught to kneel. Nathaniel's jaw worked. He took the ledger back and held it like a guilty child. That page is not mine, he said. I know, the sheriff said. It's hers. How'd it get here? The pastor answered without looking up. There's a crack in the mill wall. Wind goes through it one way. Words go the other. Pages riffle, then still, the men sought. Jonas. They did not find him. They found instead the tinsmith's kit under his boarding house bed. The folding shears. The stakes. The hammer with a handle polished by years of his hands' oil. And beneath the tray, wrapped in brown paper and tied in twine, a tight bundle of letters, each knotted with the same blue thread. The sheriff cut one free. He recognized Jonas's script this time, quick, impatient. He read with his mouth a thin line, September 9th, Eliza. You've taken to writing as if I were already dead and wanted to be sweet about it. Leave off the morning. We'll have the road 2 mornings hence. It is safe at dawn. You fret at night like a cat. There's no call for it. I'll bring the veil myself if your aunt keeps her claws in it any longer. J. He read a second October 1st girl. If you listen to pines, you'll have nothing but needles in you by winter. I walked the hollow alone and saw nothing but old roots and a stone that looks like a backbent over a basin. The ground is soft because the river was high 3 years ago and the silt makes a cushion. Put your fear down. Put on the veil. J. A. 3rd October 28th, Eliza. I'll have you on Saturday with or without your paper flowers. If the pastor gives you worry about the hour, we'll make another hour. You and I will make our own hour. I mean that as it's written. I'll fetch you at the thorn, and we'll walk in with the morning smoke. You will not walk alone. J.K. The sheriff's gaze climbed from the page to the men. The room had gone small. Greeley had covered his mouth. Nathaniel held the ledger against his chest as if it could take a bullet for him. She wasn't supposed to be walking at night, the sheriff said. He told her dawn. She went after sundown. She wrote that she heard her name, the pastor whispered. Somebody called her into the trees. Or something, Nathaniel said. Or someone using something, the sheriff added. And his eyes slid to Nathaniel before he could stop them. Hearst did not flinch. I hear what you're saying. Say it plain and be finished with it. The sheriff said it plain. Did you love her, Nathaniel? Hearst's hand went white at the knuckles where it gripped the ledger. He did not look away. I loved the mill. I loved the numbers staying true when men did not. That wasn't the question. Nathaniel's lip lifted once like a man about to spit. Then he let his mouth go quiet again. I loved what she was in this place. A stillness. I loved that. I never touched a hair on her head. Then tell me why her script is in your book. Nathaniel looked at the crack in the wall Greeley had mentioned. The wind knew the hole and made a sound against it now. She sat there one evening, while the wheel was slowed for oil, he said finally. She said it was easier to write standing. She said the numbers kept her steady. She asked if she could set her pen down somewhere that did not move under it, and she wrote those lines. She wrote other lines first, Nathaniel said. She wrote a list of things she meant to do after the wedding. Things that took 2 people to lift. Things that would have made this place kinder to live in. She wrote them as if writing them made them true. Then she tore that page out. Then she wrote these. Where is the first page? Sheriff Dunn asked. Nathaniel's eyes hardened. I can keep some mercies, he said. Afternoon leaned into evening. The pastor's wife made coffee, and nobody drank it. The lamp's smoke mixed with the odor of the veil scrap and dressed the room in stale lily. Someone, no one would admit it, began to hum a hymn and then stopped at the second line, as if the words had become sharp. What if she isn't dead? Wesley Boone asked from the hall. He had come to listen and had stayed to tremble. What if she's halfway? Between where folk go and where folk keep their sheets and bread. You can't bury a person halfway, Nathaniel said. You can try, Sheriff Dunn answered. And if the ground's wrong, it will do the rest. They went to the hollow at dusk. No one wanted to go. Everyone went anyway. The trees accepted them one by one. A few needles fell. The hollow showed a mouth where the earth had been worried by hands. It looked farther down than a day before. Things that are dug never return to the exact size they were. The men had brought shovels but stood a while without bending to them. The pines put their hush on the scene. The hush told the men they were late to their own work. We open it, the sheriff said. Nathaniel and Wesley dug. The pastor stood with his lantern held high and his lips moving so fast the words began to overlap and lose their bones. The first spadeful turned up the smelling soil that lives under living soil, rich, sour, too kind to grubs. A second bite brought burlap. The third found the torn gown they had seen before, clay in its seams, river grit embedded like salt in a wound. Again, the sheriff said. They dug. The dirt came up darker. It stuck to the shovel faces. It made the sound that a damp book makes when you try to open it. A fourth spade hit wood. The shovel juddered. The sound moved into the men's teeth. Box, Nathaniel said. Sweat stood at his hairline despite the cold. They cleared around it. A crude lid. 4 nails that had bit sideways, as if driven by someone using the wrong hand. Lift, the sheriff said. They pried their fingers under the lid. The nails squealed. The boards gave with a wet sigh. Inside lay nothing that breathed, but it was a person's shape all the same, a dress, carefully arranged. An apron folded as if by a woman in a hurry. A ribbon knotted and knotted again until the knot had learned to hold its breath. The shape of a head where a head should be, wrapped in that ribbon and cloth until it had become only a careful bundle. No flesh showed. No bone, no hair. Only the idea of a body, put there by someone who needed a body to exist so the ground would accept the bargain. Wesley reached toward the bundle. The bundle sank. Not much. The smallest surrender. As if there were water beneath the box. Not a grave. A well. The sheriff swallowed. Loud enough the men heard it. He put his palm to the dress. The cloth was cold. The cold moved into his hand and refused to leave. She was never here, he said. Pastor Greeley's voice frayed. Then where? Something answered. Not in words. In breath. From under the box. A long, tired breath, like a sleeper caught in a bad dream and trying to surface. The men staggered back. Wesley fell to one knee and stayed there, frozen as if his body had remembered a posture the hollow wanted. The breath deepened. It did not come from any throat. It came from below. It came from the seam Eliza had written. About the seam between what a living thing is and what the pines believe it is. The lantern flame guttered. The light learned to shake. Sheriff Dunn grabbed Wesley by the collar and dragged him upright. We put it back, he said, voice thin, and he replaced the lid and set the dirt over the box until the ground lay flat. We are not the ones to finish what we do not understand. But she asked, Wesley gasped. She asked not to be buried. We are not burying her, the sheriff said. We are closing the door. They left the hollow and walked home in an order that was not quite straight. Nathaniel kept looking to the side. as if expecting a second set of boots to appear beside his own. The pastor spoke the names of 3 saints in a row and then could not remember the 4th. Wesley walked with his eyes shut the last 30 paces and did not stumble once. They had gone 10 minutes when the bells rang. Not church bells. 3 tiny notes, the size of pins in a jar, the kind that slip through a pocket without your knowing. The men stopped. The sound had no place to come from. It was not above or ahead. It was inside the air. "Don't answer," the pastor whispered. "I don't know how to," Wesley said. Something stepped from the tree line, white where the dark stood. Dark where the moon found it. Eliza's silhouette, but thinner at the edges. Not less real. More. The veil hung in a strip longer than before, trailing over stones and through frost as if frost were not a thing. The figure did not lift the veil with its hands. It did not need hands. It brought its head up slowly, as a person does when she has learned to be gentle with her own pain. "Jonas," it said. The men did not look at one another. They looked at the space where a face should be. They saw almost nothing, not a skull, not a ruin, just the impression of features, as if a face had been pressed into damp clay and the clay had been asked to remember. From that almost mouth, a second word came: Nathaniel. Hurst's knees did what the earth had taught them. They bent. He did not fall quite to the ground. He made a half bow to a bride he had never wedded. "I never touched you," he said into the cold. "Everyone touched me," the figure said, in a voice that sounded like wind down a stovepipe. "Hands, words, promises. The pines took the touch and kept the rest. Where are you?" The sheriff asked, and heard the foolishness even as he spoke it. "In the road," she said. "In the water. In the hollow when it tries to act like a mouth." The sheriff tightened his grip on the lantern. "Were you buried?" The veil lifted in a current that wasn't there. Buried is a word for finishing. "I am not finished. Who led you into the trees?" Nathaniel asked softly. She turned her head a fraction, not to him. "Toward the hollow. They called me with my own voice," she said. "They called me to kneel." "Who?" "The old thing," she said simply. "It lives under. It remembers every bride who ran." Pastor Greeley found his courage like a penny in a coat pocket. "And Jonas?" he asked. "What did he do?" The veil drifted. A slow, sad sway. "He tried to help me go where he thought women go when men are done needing them. But the ground would not take me. It asked for more." "What more?" "A name," she said. "A name I did not know how to put on it. I put mine instead. Now it wears me like a shawl." The sheriff felt a small, cruel clarity come. "You went to meet him at the thorn." "Yes." "You passed the hollow." "Yes." "You heard your voice call you to kneel." "Yes, you did." "Yes." "What did he do then?" A pause. The kind of pause that makes a man wish he believed in softer gods. "He took the gown and the veil to fool the earth," she said. "He put the dress in a box when the box should have been meant for me. He said a prayer he did not mean. He left thinking he had done a hard thing that would keep me safe from worse. And it did not. It taught the worse the shape of me," she answered. "The hollow learned my size." Wesley Boone began to cry in little gasps. He made no move to hide it. "What do you want us to do?" he asked. "If we can't bury and we can't unbury, what do you want?" The figure did not answer. The veil drifted. The wind that wasn't there pressed its cold tongue against the men's teeth. "What do you want?" Wesley begged, voice cracking. "Witness," she said. It was almost a sigh. "Tell it plain," she added. And the voice did not belong to any single woman then. It belonged to all of them. The ones married and left, the ones promised and traded, the ones who kept their names a little bit hidden in their apron hems. Tell what men did in the dark. Tell what the pines kept when the church would not. Put it in the book with the numbers, so it cannot be counted wrong. The lantern flame steadied. The frost lifted in ragged breaths along the ditch. The figure could have gone, then it did not. It turned what could be called its face a little more toward the sheriff. "There is something else," it said. "What?" Sheriff Dunn whispered. "The river owes me," she answered. "And it did not pay." The men did not understand then. They would. They followed her. No, they did not follow. They found themselves led down the lane, past the church, past the place where the frost made the kneeling shape every morning. The shape was there now, shallow, almost gone, as if the day had been tempted to be ordinary. They reached the river bend where children hunted frogs and boys dared one another to jump from the flat stone into the deepest part. The water was black as iron in the low light. The current showed its teeth only where it had to. The figure stopped at the bank. The men stood in a hitching line behind it. Nathaniel wanted to put his hand out to steady her and did not move. She looked down into the water. The water did that dangerous thing where it looks like a window and a person is tempted to see what should not be seen. "Look," she said. They looked. At first they saw only their faces, thin and pale, made strange by the black. Then the water altered. It did not ripple. It simply chose to show something else, a woman's dress. White, heavy, moving as a dress moves when someone wades without taking care. A hand, not frantic, resolved, a mouth opening, not to breathe. To take clay. One palm pressed the clay in. The other smoothed it. The movement was methodical. It was not the work of a body at the end of its choices. It was the work of a body making one. "No," the pastor breathed, one hand at his chest. "Child, no." The sheriff understood first. He had seen men put their own tourniquets on. He had seen a soldier set his own bone with a belt between his teeth and two friends to hold him calm. "Eliza," he said softly, not to the figure but to the water. "What did you do?" The figure's voice was thin as winter sun. "I put the river inside me so the hollow would not take me." "Why?" "So it would carry me where men could find me," she said. "It carried only my shape." The men stood and shook at that. "Because there is a bravery that looks like foolishness when told in daytime, and there is a foolishness that looks like bravery when told by a mouthful of river." Nathaniel made a sound that might have been a prayer. The river kept showing the scene, a woman's dress, a veil floating behind, not like a train, but like a surrendered flag. Knees in the silt, hands in the clay. A calm that does not belong to the living. The figure spoke again, quieter. "He tried to lift me when he found me in the water's hold. He cried, and I did not know how to answer. He took the dress and ran. He promised to come back with help. He did not come. When help came, the water had swallowed my other half. The hollow kept the half that was left." "Jonas," Pastor Greeley said, and the name fell like a small, bad stone. The sheriff closed his eyes a moment. He opened them, and the water was mirror again. "Where is he now?" Nathaniel asked. The figure turned a little, as if listening down a hallway. "He hears my steps on the boards where he sleeps. He has been made to wear the night on his tongue." Wesley shuddered, remembering the river clay that had dropped from Jonas's mouth. He crossed himself with a hand not used to it. "Will you let us put you where you should be?" Sheriff Dunn asked. He did not know what that meant. Ground. Water. Air. The figure did not answer. The veil moved. Not in wind, in meaning. When she spoke again, the words had cooled. "Tell the book. Tell the pastor. Tell the children so they do not marry the hollow by mistake. Tell the men to keep their tongues off the dark." "And you?" the sheriff asked. "What will you do?" "I will walk," she said. "I will take the road until it learns my true name and not the one the pines gave me." "And the veil?" Nathaniel whispered. It was a stupid question. He asked it anyway. She did not look at him. "The veil belongs to the thorn. The thorn belongs to the road. The road belongs to me when I remember." The lantern guttered once, then flared. The figures of the men swung long and shivered on the ground. "Sheriff," Pastor Greeley said, voice small, "what do we write?" "Everything," the sheriff said. plain as numbers. He pulled from his coat the pencil he had dropped this morning when the veil pulsed like a living thing. He did not mind its stain now. He looked to Nathaniel. "Bring the ledger," he said. Hurst hesitated. The ledger had never left the mill. It had never learned the pastor's table. He brought it anyway. He set it down. He opened to the last page. He slid it to the sheriff. Sheriff Dunn began to write. The words did not crowd. They went down steady. The pencil made a sound like a small saw working through a true piece of pine. On the 31st of October, in the year 1896, the bride Eliza Merrick did not appear to the church. She was found instead in the seam between ground and water, and the hollow learned her size. Jonas Keene attempted a making of a body with cloth and ribbon, and the earth would not accept the trade. The Pine Voices used the bride's own voice to call her to kneel. She knelt. She filled her mouth with river clay to bind herself to water and not to root. She asked for witness. "This is witness." He stopped. He looked up. The figure had not vanished, but it had gone lighter at the edges, as if distance were what a person becomes when she is divided. "Is that right?" he asked. "Add this," she said. The pencil waited. "The thorn keeps a peace that will not decay. Do not touch the piece. It remembers hands and will make use of them." The sheriff wrote it. He set the pencil down. "Is that enough?" he asked. "For today," she said. They stood a while longer. The river pretended to be only a river again. The frost folded back into the ditch, shy as a child after a scolding. The pines learned a new quiet. "Forgive me," Nathaniel said, though he had not been accused. "Forgive yourselves when you stop needing it," the figure answered. And there was a hard mercy in the words. She turned from them. She moved along the bank. She did not disturb the thin skin of ice that had gathered in secret, while they watched the water show them their own ignorance. She did not crack twigs or lift leaves. She was a consequence passing through. The men did not follow. They listened. She made no sound. But after she had gone 20 paces, they felt the smallest pressure in their chests. A bell, the size of a pin, struck once. They went home. Pastor Greeley sat up the rest of the night with the ledger open and the box beside it. He did not pray aloud. He spoke small, practical words to God like a man telling a child how to lace boots. He sealed the box with fresh string. He wrote Eliza's name on the lid and the date. He burned nothing. Nathaniel Hurst returned to the mill and brushed sawdust from the floor as if gilding a coffin. He set the ledger in its old place. He set, beside it, a folded paper with his own handwriting. "We will not run the wheel after sundown. We will not cross the hollow alone. We will count our promises aloud." Wesley Boone slept for 10 minutes, woke to a hand on his shoulder that was not there, and did not sleep again till spring. Sheriff Abel Dunn dreamed of a face made from the river's patience. He woke with grit at the corner of his mouth and did not wipe it away. He left it to remind him. The town did what towns do when a truth lands harder than a body. It kept to the small tasks. It stacked, it swept, it salted meat. It put bread on a windowsill and watched an invisible hand flatten it and did not shout. It allowed the pines to speak and pretended to hear only wind, and the road to Ash Pines, where the veil had first learned to darken, held in its ditch a shape of frost that tried each morning to become a woman kneeling, and each afternoon forgot how. Some truths ask only to be written. Others ask to be shared out like bread. This one asked to be shared and kept both. The days after the river's revelation settled over. Ash pines like ash after a burning dot. No one spoke the story aloud except in whispers, and even then only when a window was cracked and a candle was lit as though the flame might stand witness if the telling stirred something awake. Sheriff Abel Dunn kept the ledger locked in his desk. Pastor Greeley kept the ribboned box beneath his bed. Nathaniel Hurst kept his sawmill shuttered an hour before sundown, no matter how many wages fell behind. And all of them kept the same habit. When night came, they listened. The strange thing about a town marked by a haunting is that it doesn't crumble. It doesn't scream. It simply changes its shape. Softens in places where it used to hold firm. Hardens in places that used to be gentle. Ash Pines did both. The children stopped playing near the road. The women buried their hair. Ribbons instead of wearing them. Men no longer sat with their backs to the woods. And every morning without fail the frost in the ditch along the road arranged itself into the shape of a kneeling woman. Sometimes she held her own face. Sometimes she didn't. Sometimes her hands were empty as grief. By midday, the sun erased her as if embarrassed to have seen her at all. But each dawn, she returned. The first 7 nights on the first night after the truth was written. The townsfolk heard 3 knocks on their walls, not doors walls, like a hand pressing through the timber. Politely. Asking for entry. It did not need. Sheriff Dunn looked out his window and saw the figure of the bride standing at the edge of the Talbot property. Her veil trailed like a white scar across the ground. She did not move. She did not vanish. She simply waited. By the second night, she had traveled the length of town, placing her silent weight on each doorstep. Even the dogs, usually brave enough to chase off bears, hid with their heads buried beneath woodpiles. By the third night, the children began sleepwalking. They all walked the same direction, toward the road, toward the thorn bush, toward the place where the veil first darkened. There, parents locked the doors. The children scratched at the walls, whispering, "Someone's calling my name." By the fourth night, Jonas Keene was found, or rather his coat was found, laid neatly across the church steps. Inside its pockets were 15 stones, each wrapped in river clay. His boots stood beside the creek, pointed toward the deepest part. No body surfaced. The pastor refused to ring the church bell for his passing. Not out of spite, out of terror. "My voice will carry too far," he muttered. The hollow listens. By the 5th night, Nathaniel Hurst found footprints circling the mill wheel. Small. Bare. Mine. Lace thin, but deeper than before, as if someone heavier than a woman had stepped along with her. He shuttered the mill early that night and lit every lantern he owned. Still, he heard a single word whispered behind the wall crack: "Nathaniel." He did not answer. By the 6th night, a veil scrap fluttered on every gate in town, some white, some blackened, some so old-looking they seemed centuries removed. The scraps fell apart when touched. The meaning did not. By the 7th night, Ash Pines accepted something quietly. The bride was not visiting, she was returning. The brides rode on the 8th night. The rain started. Hard, sharp. Winter rain that came down almost sideways. The sheriff walked the road with his lantern hooded, and his breath steaming. Toward the ditch. Toward the frost that had become too familiar. Tonight, there was no frost. Tonight, there was water. A thin sheet, the shape of a woman. Kneeling, rippling instead of freezing. As if the cold had learned her outline. And now the rain was rehearsing it. "She's marking the road," he whispered. "Marking her way back." Behind him, boots scraped on gravel. Pastor Greeley approached, coat soaked to the bone. "She's got unfinished steps," the pastor said. "A bride walks a road twice, once to the altar, and once after everything else is taken." The sheriff frowned. "What does she want from us?" The pastor looked down the road where the pines crowded like mourners. "She wants what the church never wrote down. She wants her story told the way she lived it, and the way she died. And after that?" The pastor swallowed. "Then she walks." The sheriff shook his head. "Walks where?" The pastor turned to him with eyes that had not slept. "Wherever she pleases." The night of the lanterns, that night, the townsfolk lit lanterns and hung them outside their homes. Not out of celebration, out of fear. Light was the oldest language they knew for keeping darkness honest. The lanterns swayed. The wind carried a smell like wet Lily and river stones. Then slowly one lantern flickered. Another. Went dim, a third sputtered and died. A path formed in the darkness, a straight one, leading from the pastor's house to the sheriff's office, to the mill, to the thorn bush. And finally, to the road that led out of ash pines. A bride's path. A procession. Wesley Boone stepped out of his cabin, trembling so hard he could hardly hold his coat shut. He saw her. Bride of Ash Pines, Eliza Merritt though she was. Hardly that any more walked the procession, as if guided by hands invisible and ancient. Her veil dragged across stone and dirt without picking up a single grain. Her dress trailed behind her like a long sorrow. Her face. No one agreed on her face. Some said they saw clay where features should be. Some said they saw smooth skin with no eyes. Some said they saw a woman crying. But Wesley, poor, fragile Wesley, claimed he saw all three at once. She passed him without pause. Her steps made no sound. Wesley whispered, "Are you here to rest?" She stopped. Turned. Tilted her head, not quite like a person, not quite unlike one. "Rest," she said, in a voice layered with more than one tone. "Rest is for the buried." And she walked on, the final ledger entry. Sheriff Dunn knew what he needed to do before the night was gone. He brought out the mill ledger, the one that now held the truth, and added one last entry under the final line. The pencil shook in his hand. On this night, she walks the road again. Not to seek a grave, nor a groom, nor an answer. She walks because the hollow let her go unfinished. She walks because the river remembers half a face. She walks because the veil came apart before the vow. She walks because no one carried her home. He closed the book, locked it, left it on the desk. He prayed without knowing if he still believed in prayer. The day after, in the morning, the rain stopped, but the road long curved. Lonely road that led to Ash Pincheld. Something new. Along its edges were threads of veil lace, some white, some black, some translucent as breath, and in a single winding line, pressed into the wet clay, were footprints, not aimed toward town, aimed away, past the mill. Past the church, past the river bend. Past every place that had held her. Into the woods, deeper than any trail, deeper than any map. And beside them larger prints, heavier prints. Clay crusted, root-shaped prints. Something walked with her, not dragging her, not chasing her, walking beside her. As if the hollow had chosen to let her lead. The bride's passing for weeks afterward. People swore they saw her on fog-thick mornings. Flicker of white just past a hemlock stump, a dragging shadow at the edge of vision, a shape kneeling in the ditch, smoothing frost with patient hands. Late travelers claimed she walked alongside them for a time. Neither hostile nor kind, simply present. A reminder. Children began placing small wildflowers by the thorn bush without being told why. They said they dreamed of a lady who asked for them sweetly, like a mother showing a child where to set a cup. Men crossing the bridge avoided looking into the water. Women felt a chill when brushing their hair at night, as if someone stood behind them, remembering what hair feels like in living. Hands, and always without fail every seventh night, a soft knocking touched the walls of Ash Pines, not a request. Remembering. The road that never forgot years past. Then, decades. Families moved. Children grew and left. The mill wheel finally stopped, turning. The church roof caved one winter and was never repaired. But the road never lost the mark of her. To this day, travelers claim that just before dawn, they see fresh footprints appearing in wet earth, as if laid by an unseen bride taking deliberate steps. Some hear weeping, some hear humming, some swear they hear a voice whisper, "Do not let them bury me." And there are nights, particularly in late October, when the pines lean toward the road all at once, as if bowing to a procession that no longer Needs lanterns or witnesses, the hollow still breathes. Rivers still holds half a face. The bride still walks, not because she seeks revenge, not because she seeks peace, because unfinished stories do not sleep. They wander. And the road to ash pines remains hers. Forever. She walks the road still, for the dead do not rest when the world forgets where to lay them.